Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our presentation today.
Also, a warm welcome from my side.
Andreas and I are very excited about this international collaboration, and we look forward to sharing our results with you. The title of our piece is How Does Fantasy Sport Impact Soccer Fandom? And we're looking at this through recipient behavior and user experience through German-based fantasy sport. So let's jump in with just a little bit of background here. We know about the immense growth within the North American industry. Currently, there's around 60 million participants, and that growth is from estimates of 1 to 3 million in the early 90s. And so within a matter of 30 years, seeing an industry grow that much is incredible, and it's made a very significant impact within the sport community. We know reasons for that growth revolve around internet and World Wide Web, allowing more access and information. But more recently, the evolution of daily fantasy sport has really given those participation numbers a nice boost. Reasons for popularity in Germany and North America, really three main reasons. One is that fantasy sport gets consumers and fans and participants closer to the game, whether it's with statistics or coaching strategy, or getting to know players and their tendencies, or even having reasons to follow more action and more games is really important. A second reason is the fact that participants get to act in some sort of general manager role or a coach role where they're able to take actions in their own lineup, draft players, trade and make transactions on their own to then compete. So there's a little bit of control factor in there and controlling their own success in the game or the activity. And a final reason is we're seeing buy-in from the leagues and from media companies to where even like in North America, the NFL, or in Europe and Germany, the Bundesliga, where there's buy-in from those leagues to be a part of the fantasy sport activity. So those three main reasons are very important. And even in research that myself and Dr. Billings have conducted, we've used the term Sport Fan 2.0 for fantasy sport users because the fantasy sport user is an amplified fan in every aspect. And there's not a whole lot of time to review that particular study right now, but let's continue forth with this study. So we talked about the North American numbers. Fantasy sport use in Germany is approximately 4 to 5 million participants strong. And one of the largest providers is Kickbase, and they have around 1 million users, and that's involving soccer. And we introduced Kickbase this way because that's a big part of this particular study. So we see fantasy sport acting as a touch point between the league, Bundesliga, right, and the consumer. Fantasy sport is a touch point there. And we introduced the term the recipient experience into the research. And that can be defined as interaction of the individual with the value proposition of a company at different touch points. And so we're focusing in on that touch point with fantasy sport being that. And so according to this idea, Kickbase then is that touch point because it is in between the league and the user and allowing the user to be more involved, to be more active, and to have that control that we just went over. So the research intent within this study was to understand if engagement in fantasy sport influences being a fan in real soccer or rooting for a real soccer club. So the research question is, representing fantasy sport, does Kickbase have any influence on the recipient's behavior or experience? And if applicable, to what extent does the influence manifest itself? And the hypothesis that's guiding this research is Kickbase will have a significant influence both on the recipient's behavior and on the recipient's experience concerning attitudes towards individual players and clubs. So to investigate this and to investigate the recipient experience in Kickbase as a touch point, quantitative online surveys were conducted and disseminated via relevant Facebook groups. Data were collected from 148 fantasy sport using soccer fans and 158 non-fantasy sport using soccer fans. And so part of this analysis is to get comparisons. So for the fantasy sport users, the instrument examined Kickbase use, media use, information acquisition, and Kickbase's influence on sympathies for real clubs and real players. For the non-fantasy sport using football fans, the instrument contained quantitative aspects of media use and information acquisition.
So thank you, Brody. I'll take over now. In addition to the online survey, another research method was used. Over a period of about 3 months, the sympathies for other clubs and players were documented by self-observation by 3 probants. But within the scope of our presentation, I will just focus on the online survey. At least at this point, it's important to mention that the online survey as well as the self-observation was done by 3 of my students, Lasse Brunswick, Lukas Schölzel and Jan Marlon Stechemesser. So let's move on to some selected findings. First, Kickbase users were asked about what kind of soccer content they ask for if the club they are rooting for and players which are selected for their individual Kickbase teams are playing at the same time. So what you see here is that just 8% of the Kickbase users are following the single match of their favorite club. And the majority, about 65%, are following the league's conference. And a quarter says, yes, I'm following the single match, but also inform myself at the same time via live ticker, second screen or similar methods. We also ask soccer fans who are not Kickbase users an almost similar question. About 46% are following the single match, and the same percentage is following the single match but inform themselves about second screen, similar method and so on, about the results within other games. And just 8% are following the league's conference. So at least just by an easy view, you can see the differences between these 2 groups. In comparison, it becomes clear that these fans, unlike the Kickbase users, are much more focused on the game of their favorite team. Differences between these 2 groups can also be seen by other items, such as the question about the reception of the starting lineup of one's own team and that of other clubs in the league. 83% of the Kickbase users inform themselves about the lineup of other games. Regarding to this result, there's a huge difference because just 52% of the non-Kickbase using soccer fans are interested in the lineup of other games. The extent of the reception of sports communication also seems to be influenced by fantasy sports use. More than half of the surveyed Kickbase users strongly agree with the statement that the scope of reception would have increased since they started using Kickbase, while another 32% at least somewhat agree with this statement. So for more than 80% of fantasy sport users, the consumption of sport communication has more or less increased. And perhaps the most remarkable result is the question of a change in sympathy for other clubs and players. Because in German it's said that soccer fans would rather part with his or her husband or wife than switch sympathy from one club to another. In this aim, over 80% of Kickbase users strongly or somewhat agree with the statement that using Kickbase has changed their attitude and their sympathy regarding to other players within the league. So there is a change. And it's almost the same regarding to other clubs. Not as strong as regarding to the players. Of course, the players are selected for their individual Kickbase teams. But at least there's also a difference regarding to the time before they used Kickbase. Thus, fantasy sport use massively influences attitudes and interests and can't be ignored in the aim of a touch point to player, clubs and league brands. By the way, the result of the self-observation, which is not presented here, is confirming that pointed summary. Thank you very much for being with us. We are looking forward to your questions, to your remarks via video annotation or at least via email. So, goodbye to everyone.